Hello, sixth graders. Miss Waage here. And for today's lesson, I need your help fixing my grandma's recipe for banana bread. You see, the problem is she left me some ratios that were for bigger batches than what I'm looking for. I just want to make one batch, one loaf of banana bread, and I've got some crazy measurements out there for some different ingredients. So I need your help. As you can see, I've got my chef's hat, I've got my apron, I'm ready to go. I just need your help fixing these recipes. Or this recipe and the ingredients in it. So let's get to it. All right, we've got some ratio tables here, just like we started working with last week. So we're going to use these ratio tables to create equations that would be able to tell me how many of that particular ingredient I could use for any batch or amount of banana bread I wanted to make. So if I want to make 50 loaves or 72 loaves, I could figure it out based on the equation we create for each part or each ingredient that goes into the banana bread. So we're going to look at our ratio tables and see if we can complete those equations. So our first ingredient, try and get the glare off of that there. There we go. So our first ingredient, pretty important one for banana bread, is bananas. So we've got our ratio table. So X would be representative of the number of batches, and Y would be representative of the number of bananas I need for the batch. So in the recipe, it said that if I wanted to make 2 batches, I would need 6 bananas. But as I said earlier, I'm not wanting to make 2 batches. I only want to make 1. So I've got to figure out the unit rate for each of these ingredients. Some of them are given to me, but in this case, bananas, I only know that for 2 batches, I need 6 bananas. But we can notice a pattern, the relationship between X and Y. If I take X and multiply it by 3, that gives me Y. Let's check and see if that works here. 5 times 3 equals 15. 6 times 3 equals 18. And 8 times 3 equals 24. So we figured out the rule. It's multiply 3 times whatever our batch number is. So that means we know that for one batch, I'm going to need 3 bananas. So one batch for 3 bananas. So we can just write that as our equation here. So if I'm thinking bananas equals, that's what our Y is. Our Y is equal to the number of bananas. So I know it's 3 times X. So 3 times X gives me Y. 3 times the number of batches gives me, which I'm not going to use B again, so we'll just put X here as well. So 3 times the number of batches tells me how many bananas I need, because we know that every batch I need 3 bananas. So I'm not going to use more than 3, not going to use less than 3. That's exactly what I need. So based on that, we can check that rule. 1 to 3, that's the relationship is times 3. And that works for all of these other variables in the table. And we could plug any value in for X, so any batch number, and figure out how many bananas I would need. So say I want to make 22 loaves of banana bread. I can use my equation and say Y equals 3 times X, which I'm going to put in parentheses, 3 times 22. Y equals 66. So that would mean in order to make 22 batches or 22 loaves of banana bread, I would need 66 bananas. Pretty crazy. That's a lot of bananas. Thankfully, I don't need to make that many loaves. I'm just making 1, which means I need 3 bananas. So let's go over to my baking station here. Got my bowl. And would you look at that? I had exactly 3 bananas left. And if you're making banana bread, you want them to be ripe, so that you want them to look kind of like they're about ready to go bad. So I'm going to go ahead and just get these in there real quick, and then we can move on to our next ingredient. So 1 banana, 2 bananas, and 3. All right, we've got our bananas taken care of. Let's go to our next ingredient. All right, here we are back at our ingredient board. So next I need sugar. This one, I was actually given the unit rate, and we're doing this in tablespoons. Where'd my marker go? I think I brought it over here with me. Grab that. Okay. So, for 0 loaves, I would need 0 tablespoons of sugar. Well, that makes sense because I'm not making anything. It says for 1 batch, I'd need 7 tablespoons of sugar. So, if I'm going to do that, I already know right away what my unit rate is and what I'm going to use for my equation. Whatever the unit rate is, whatever you find for when x equals 1, whatever y equals is going to be your coefficient. That's a word we talked about at the very beginning of expressions and equations. Coefficient is the number that multiplies with your variable. So we've got 7, y equals 7 times x. You could also write this as y equals 7 times x with a dot. We don't want to use a normal multiplication symbol because then it'll look like 2 x's. Or we could do y equals 7 times x. But really, the most simple way is just to write it this way. And we can check and make sure that works for everyone. So 3 times 7 equals 21. And 6 times 7 equals 42. Yep, the rule works. So our equation for this one is y equals 7x. And actually, these kind of came from the lesson, but they fit my recipes as well. So number 3 has this same table, and number 2 has this same table from the lesson. So we figured out that for 1 batch, which is what I'm making, I would need 7 tablespoons of sugar. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to put that in the bowl right this second, but we'll move on to our next ingredient. So we're going to flip the board and see what else we need. These are not all the ingredients I need for the banana bread, just some. There's quite a few ingredients more that I need, but I'm not going to go through all of them with you for today. So next up, we've got flour. So this actually relates to problem 5 from the lesson. So we're looking at flour. Now this one's got some decimals, which makes it a little tricky. Oops, my X got erased there. So that's saying I'm going to go to I don't have my unit rate, which is what we're going to need in order to figure out our coefficient or our number that multiplies with our variable, x. So we're going to have to figure it out based on what we have here. So I need to figure out the relationship between 2 and 5 and the relationship between 5 and 12.5. So what would I multiply times 2 to get me close to 5? I know 2 times 2 is 4. So it's going to be 2 something. So for when x equals 1, I know it's going to be 2 and something else. So 2 times 1 or a fourth would give me 2 or a half. So what if I put together 2 halves? 2 halves would make that extra hole I need to go from 4 to 5. So my value there would be 2.5. So now we can check that to make sure that that is the rule. For 1 batch, I need 2.5 cups. We're working with cups here. Cups of flour. So 1 batch is 2.5. If I multiply this by 2, I get to 2. And I multiply 2.5 by 2. 2.5 plus 2.5 would give me that 5. What about 5 times 2.5? Let's check it and make sure that it works. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 2 is 12. And then we'd put our decimal back in to get 12.5. So yes, that is our rule. That for 1 batch, we need 2.5 cups of flour. So every time we find the unit rate, we find what x is when it equals 1. That means we have our answer for the coefficient, or the number that goes before our variable. So we have 2.5. We have 2.5, and then we just put x on there. 2.5x. So that means I could take this equation and use it to solve for any amount of batches of I wanted to make for my banana bread. So I could say 2.5 times 10 if I wanted to figure out how many for 10 batches or 10 loaves of bread, and that would give me 25. So I would need 25 cups of flour. So the whole point of this lesson is to be able to take ratio tables or just normal tables. Tables are made up of ratios. We're taking those tables and figuring out what the equation is that fits it. So what you need to do every time is, if you're not given the unit rate, like you are in this one, or you're not given it in this one. You have to figure out what y equals when x is 1. That is going to give you the number that you need to multiply with x. So eventually you're going to move into some relationships where you're going to have addition and subtraction. But right now we're just focused on the multiplication part. So whatever is multiplying times our coefficient to give us the answer for our equation. So flour we found was 2.5 times x. We could test all these values and that would be true. Okay, and then our last ingredient is eggs. So eggs, we don't have, I left a space in the table, and this problem didn't actually come from the lesson, but this is accurate for my recipe. So if I've got 2 batches of, or 2 loaves of bread that I want to make, I need 4 eggs. So I need to figure out what x or what y is when x equals 1. That's the value I'm missing. That's the value I need to solve for. The unit rate. That is the one we're looking for. So if I went from 2 to 1, that means I divided by 2. So I can do the same thing on this side to find my missing value. 4 divided by 2 would give me 2. So now I've got, and I can check the relationship between my x and my y to make sure that, so it's showing for every time x goes up by 1, then y goes up by 2. So that would mean we take the y value and put it here, and we multiply it times x. Y equals 2x. That's our equation. Or 2 times x. Or 2 times x. They're all the same thing, but the easiest way to write it is just with the number right up against the variable, because we know that that means you multiply them. So 0 times 2 equals 0. Yep, that works. Plug in x. X is 1 times 2 equals 2. Yep, that works. X is 2. 2 times 2 equals 4. Yep, that one works as well. Taking x as 7, we plug it into the equation using substitution. Haven't talked about that word in a while. That's called 7 times 2 equals 14. Yep, that works. And when x is 10, 2 times 10 equals 20. So we have figured out all the equations needed to, if we wanted to make batches and loaves of banana bread galore, we could figure it out by plugging in any value of x. Any number of loaves is what x stands for. And that would tell us how many of each ingredient we need. So pretty cool. People, bakers and chefs and such could use equations in their jobs, because if they're baking for a large amount of people, they could take their ingredients just like we did here and break them up and figure out the unit rate that they need for one batch and then multiply it times however many batches they need to make for the amount of people they need to feed. Pretty cool. Well, that was our last ingredient, and I will let you go and move on to the rest of the problems in the lesson. So, bye.